Hello, my name is Hallie, and welcome to this review where we will explore the organization of the human nervous system as it applies to the behavioral sciences portion of your MCAT. We will start with a general overview of the human nervous system, and then we'll look at each part of the nervous system and identify the key characteristics of each. We'll take a closer look at the autonomic system and identify how this system can change our organ system behavior during periods of stress and relaxation. After reviewing these topics, we'll have a better understanding of the organization of our own nervous system and be able to identify the purpose of each division. And we'll also be able to answer questions such as the one at the bottom of the screen, which asks us to identify the hierarchy of our own neuronal system. The nervous system is divided into two parts, one being the central nervous system, which consists of our brain and our spinal cord. The other part of our nervous system is the peripheral system, which is basically all of the neuronal tissue outside of our brain and spinal cord, predominantly our sensory and motor neurons. The peripheral system is then further divided into the somatic and autonomic systems, and the autonomic system is even further subdivided into two divisions, and we will discuss the personalities of each of these later in this review. But what we really want to take away from this particular diagram is that the central system is very important in helping us process how we want to react to a sensory stimuli. However, the peripheral system is important in collecting those sensory stimuli and also firing those motor neurons in order to respond to that stimulus. So it's very important that the central and peripheral systems are able to communicate efficiently. For the purposes of this particular review, all we really need to know about the central nervous system is that we have a brain and a spinal cord. You'll certainly want to know a lot more about the organization of the brain for test day, but for now, this is plenty. There are three types of nerve cells in our nervous system. The first are sensory neurons, and these will receive a stimulus from our environment, send an afferent signal, and then our interneurons in our central nervous system will interpret that sensory signal and then decide how we want to react to that. It will then tell the motor neurons how to respond, and those motor neurons will send an efferent signal to our body to help us move and respond to that sensory stimuli. Now, sensory neurons and motor neurons are part of the peripheral nervous system, while interneurons are part of our central nervous system. On test day, it can be a little tricky to remember which is afferent and efferent, and the best way to remember is that A comes before E alphabetically. So we receive a sensory stimuli first, so that's our afferent signal, and then we respond later with our motor neurons through an efferent signal. So let's say our sensory neurons sense that we are in danger, like we touch something sharp and we need to move our hand away from this stimuli. We can then have a reflex arc, which will basically help us save time and protect our body from unnecessary damage. And what happens is that our sensory neuron will perceive that we need to move, and our motor neurons can break protocol, if you will, and go ahead and move our hand away from that danger without waiting for instructions from the interneurons. However, do note that our sensory neurons will still send that signal to the interneurons. For the rest of this review, we will focus our attention on the peripheral nervous system, and that is divided into two parts, one being the somatic system. This is everything that's under voluntary control. If you can consciously tell your body to do this, then it's part of the somatic system. The other part is the autonomic system, and this is everything under involuntary control, such as pupil dilation, peristalsis, things of that nature that we don't want to have to consciously think about all the time. And then the autonomic system is then further divided into the parasympathetic and sympathetic divisions. The sympathetic division controls all of the behaviors that we associate with stress. For example, if we are hiking down a nice little trail and we see a bear, we're going to jump into that fight or flight reaction where we're going to either fight the bear and we're going to survive, or we're going to fly, we're going to run away. And I love that we call this the sympathetic part of our nervous system. It's as if our nervous system understands that we're in a bad situation and it's sympathizing with us to help us to survive. And in this diagram, it depicts everything that's either going to be stimulated or inhibited by our sympathetic division. So we just saw a bear, we want to survive. What behaviors would you expect to happen in response to that stress? First thing that's going to happen is we're going to have secretion of adrenaline. We do not want to have to worry about being fatigued as we're trying to get away from this bear. We're also going to see dilation of the pupils. That's so we can see everything really, really well, because this would be a bad time to trip over something and fall down. We're also going to take steps so that we can have an increase in our respiration and heartbeat, so that we can get oxygen and materials to our muscles. We're also going to have sweating to regulate body temperature. Now, things that we probably don't want to do right now would be something like having a snack. So we're going to inhibit activity that's associated with digestion. However, we are going to stimulate glucose production because our muscles are using a lot of ATP right now, and we want to make sure that we're breaking down glycogen from our liver so that we can continue to have glucose in our bloodstream and continue cellular respiration. It would also be really inconvenient to have a potty break right now, so we're going to inhibit bladder activity as well. So congratulations, we got away from the bear, we survived. Now our body wants to recover, and we're going to move into the parasympathetic division of our nervous system. And this is everything that would have to do with recovery after responding to a stress stimuli. Now we can predict how our parasympathetic nervous system will change the behavior of our organs. We certainly want our respiration and heartbeat to go back to baseline. We also would like to have a snack and get more energy into our bodies. So we're going to stimulate everything that's associated with digestion. Great time to have a potty break and excrete all those metabolic byproducts that have been collecting when we were in that high stress mode. Also a nice time to let our pupils relax and potentially get some sleep. Now that we've completed this review, we can approach questions that ask us to identify the organization of our nervous system, such as this one. And the correct answer is C. This is the only answer option that correctly describes going from a very specific part of our nervous system to a more general part of the nervous system in the correct order. We can now also attack questions that ask us to identify the different types of neurons in our nervous system, as well as the types of signals that each one will relay. And the correct answer is B. Remember that earlier we had identified that A comes before E alphabetically. So an afferent signal would be a sensory signal because we have sensory signals first. And answer choice A would be a great example of an afferent signal. However, we're looking for an efferent signal. And answer choice B is the only option that correctly identifies a motor response to a stimuli. Now that the review is complete, let's highlight what we really want to remember for test day. Let's remember that our nervous system is divided into two main parts. One being the central nervous system, which contains the brain and spinal cord, and the peripheral nervous system, which is all of the neuronal tissue outside of the central nervous system. The peripheral system is then further divided into the somatic system, which is everything we would consider under voluntary control, and the autonomic system, which is everything we would have under involuntary control. The autonomic system is then further divided into the sympathetic responses, which are all the behaviors we would have in response to some form of stress, and the parasympathetic system, which is all the responses we would associate with relaxation. Well, congratulations on completing this review. I hope you enjoyed learning more about your own nervous system and how it can change its behavior in response to different stimuli. Thank you for joining me, and best of luck on your exam.